functions can be declared in two main ways, according to the modern style guides. There are more ways, but these are the two simplest and the most kind of generally applicable. So you either declare a function using the function keyword, which we've been doing so far. So if you declare a function, say max1, doesn't matter what the code is. The code just says we take in two things, presumably numbers, but it could be other stuff too. If the first one is bigger than the second one, we're going to return the first one, otherwise return the second one, right? So pretty straightforward. If you use the function keyword, then what happens is that the name will always exist. Like it will, the function will be kind of declared at the top of the scope it's declared in. So these are usually the simplest ways to declare functions. There's a second way, which is to use what's called an arrow notation or an arrow syntax. So now max2 is a constant. You can use this be a let also, but you can say const. Again, habit is the const everything. So what this says is that this is a constant. What does this equal? Now it equals this blob here. So this is the blob that we should focus on. So this blob is basically called an anonymous function. This is a function that doesn't have a name. It's just a function object. So this actually represents, it's verbatim here. It says a comma b. It's this thing right here. It's a chunk of code that it will compile into a chunk of code. Now it doesn't have a name, so we need to assign it a name, and we're going to call it max2. So that's why max2 points to this chunk of code here. So what does this chunk of code do? Well, this chunk of code has a parentheses here, which is kind of like here, right? This AB is actually matching this AB. It says there's some function that doesn't have a name that takes in two parameters called A, or two arguments, A and B. And then here's the arrow, right? It's an equal sign, right? Greater than. That's called an arrow. It says take these parameters and send them to run this code, right? Take these two parameters, A and B, send them with a equals greater than arrow to run a bit of braces code, right? With braces in it. So we should have a semicolon here. Just good habit to have it. To do the braces. So what is this code? It's the exact same code as up here, right? The bodies are exactly the same. And you can define them in both ways. So I can call max 1 of 10 and 20. So that should run max 1. I mean, you don't have to look at the details, but we're going to console log is 20. And if we go to max 2, it should jump in. Notice how the code is now running in max 2. And it does the same thing. So these are pretty much equivalent ways of declaring functions. The nice way about this is that you can't put max 2 to anything else, right? You can avoid this embarrassing example if we put max 2 to hello, because if you try to assign max 2 away, now it's actually a const, so you can't actually assign it to say hello, but nothing prevents you from assigning max 1 to hello, right? So notice how, so this was like the embarrassing example before where, we define max 2, and now max 1 was a function called max 1, but because it was defined like a function, it doesn't actually have a const property on it. So when I say max 1 equals hello, it actually turns into hello, and the old code is gone. It's not referred to anymore. So the nice thing about having the max 2 case using const is that you can't accidentally destroy it by assigning it to, say, a string. Okay, so then it's like, when do you use the function keyword versus the double arrow, the equals, right, greater than arrow syntax? Well, one rule that I think works pretty well is that you use the function keyword for top level functions. So these are functions that are not declared inside of any other braces. So for example, here in this slide, function max1 works fine because it's at the top level. There's nothing else outside of it. It's not inside of anything else. There's no braces around it. But something like this you shouldn't do. So you shouldn't say if x is greater than 10 with the braces, then we're going to define a function inside of it. This leads to all sorts of kind of unpredictable behaviors. You don't ever want to declare a function inside of braces. So in fact here, the braces are here, right? The scope is declared here with the if statement, and we're defining a function here. We're defining a function here inside of inside of the if. So we should not do this according to these heuristics because we're inside of braces. Whereas here is fine because we're not inside of any braces. We're at the top level. So there's a pretty good rule to follow in general. So if you want to be inside of braces, use the double arrow. The equals greater than arrow. So in this way, you have a top level function, which we declare using function, and then inside the braces, we declare inside functions, nested functions using the double arrow. So again, this is top level, so we can use the function keyword. And now we're inside someone else's braces. So to declare any functions inside here, we should use this double arrow syntax, even though it looks a little more verbose. So recall this again, this is an anonymous function with no name, and we're going to assign it to a name max2 here. So I think this rule works pretty well in practice. Okay, so why do this? There are some complications and really subtle issues with what's called a special this variable in JavaScript. You don't have to worry about this. No pun intended, this at this point. No pun intended again. But just follow these rules of top level using function, inside using the arrows, and you should be okay.